Hi, my name is Kelly Mack, and on behalf of my collaborators Maitraye, Dhruv, Jain, Danielle, Bragg, John Tang, Andrew Begel, Erin Beneteau, Josh Urban Davis, Abraham Glasser, Joon Park, and Venkatesh Potluri, I'd like to present a paper that we worked on during our time spent at Microsoft Research, Mixed Abilities and Varied Experiences, a group auto-ethnography of a virtual summer internship. As we prepared for a summer internship and intern cohort in Washington at Microsoft Research, the COVID-19 pandemic hit and we were forced to switch to an all-virtual internship mediated via Microsoft Teams and email. We recognized that we were in the unique position of being a part of a team with mixed abilities, communicating in a fully virtual setting, a setting which is becoming more common in the post-pandemic era. So we decided to reflect on our experiences, and today we're here to share with you what we learned about establishing and maintaining accessibility this summer. As a brief overview of this presentation, first we'll be giving you a bit of detail into our team's background. I will then go over our data collection and analysis process. I'll present our 5 main themes that came out of our analysis, and finally I'll share some of the key takeaways from what we learned. First, we were all members or affiliated with the Microsoft Research Ability team. The broader team had about 30 affiliated full-time employees and interns, a subset of 11 of whom participated in our study. All 11 people took part in the data collection and journaling process, and 5 authors volunteered to perform a large amount of the data analysis and paper writing process. We refer to them as meta-authors in this paper. Of these authors, 8 were interns and 3 were full-time employees, and 5 people identified as people with disabilities or deaf or hard of hearing or neurodiverse. Specifically, people identified as hard of hearing, deaf, blind, having ADHD, and disabled via chronic illness. Moving on to our methods, we collected field entries and retrospective accounts around our summer meetings and communication practices. We used open and axial coding to create 9 of our high-level codes, and then, through discussion amongst the meta-authors, narrowed to 5 main themes. The 5 main themes that we uncovered were virtually induced inaccessibilities, how key allyship was to our experience this summer, how difficult it was to remember all of the accommodations, the conflicting access needs that arose, and finally how power dynamics affected our experience. I'm going to go over the first 4 of these themes in depth, and I encourage you to look at the paper to learn more details about all of them. First, I'd like to share a brief story with you that was a good example of virtually induced inaccessibility. When in a meeting, Jain, who was hard of hearing, presented to the group. Jain was on mute and started to share his screen, which meant that he could only see his own video and the video of the person who most recently spoke. While we tried to alert him that he was still on mute, it seemed impossible to get his attention. Since we knew he couldn't hear us, we tried waving our hands and typing messages in the shared chat. Nothing worked. Even his cart captioner couldn't get his attention. Eventually, one participant made a paper sign that said, "You're on mute," but even then, it took a while to become visible because he had to speak long enough for his video to be prioritized and shown to Jain. This experience pointed out a cascade of accessibility problems with the video conferencing software while sharing slides that disrupted the meeting. In this example, we see the invisibility of disability and accessibility that was created because of the use of these virtual platforms. So for example, it was hard to see a person's setup. Jain had a complex setup that involved multiple monitors so that he could see captions, his presentation, and the Teams call. The setup was invisible to the rest of us, and so it was hard to understand why we couldn't get his attention in that moment. Second, it was hard to see when accommodations were broken throughout the summer. So for example, Jain almost always used a captioner in meetings. The absence of a captioner would have been visually obvious to sighted people during meetings, and accommodations could have been made to address the access issues, like talk slower. Finally, it was hard to see the effects of inaccessibility. So for example, I experienced severe motion sickness this summer that was triggered by several video presentations in our meetings. Again, while someone going pale or becoming physically ill is visible in person, it's almost impossible to notice virtually. Because of this invisibility of inaccessibility introduced by the virtual setting, we found that allies had to check in with disabled peers frequently to understand if and how to provide support. At the same time, a virtual setting created a new avenue for allies to provide support, back-channeling via text messaging on Microsoft Teams. Interns in particular used this feature to check in with disabled peers during inaccessible moments in meetings. At the same time, the text chat associated with each Teams meeting could be used to remind people of access norms, for example stating, "Remember to say your name before speaking." Finally, the chat could even be used to fix inaccessibilities. As Das reflected, when the work anniversary video was being played without audio description, an intern quickly wrote down a short description of the video on chat. She wrote, "Alt, pictures from person's friends ranging from Mount St. Helens to Texas, pictures of a person and his spouse hiking, thank yous from team members saying how much they loved the hikes he suggested. 6 members loved this message and 2 others liked it, including one of our interns who is blind. Next, we wanted to discuss the difficulty that we had remembering the accommodations for the group. Several accommodations during the summer required changes to group norms. For example, speak slowly, say your name before speaking, make PowerPoint presentations accessible and send slides ahead of time, and limit the motion from your camera or screen share. As Bragg reflected, it becomes increasingly difficult to always remember all of the accessibility protocols during meetings as the number of disabilities grows. This becomes more difficult if you are an occasional meeting participant and if the set of disabilities or accommodations changes over time. And Davis commented, I noticed each week that there was a solid attempt to say our names prior to speaking. However, as the meetings continued, this practice rather quickly deteriorated. However, simply remembering access needs wasn't enough, as sometimes access needs interacted or conflicted with each other. For example, Bragg reflected about issues with showing ASL interpreters in presentations. We came up with a protocol where meeting presenters shared their screen, which included both the pinned interpreter and the meeting slides. This enabled everybody in the lab to view the interpreter at a reasonable size while simultaneously viewing the presentation. However, sometimes this resulted in the slides, especially text, becoming prohibitively small to read. In another example, Davis describes the care needed to create an artistic video for the team. I spent a considerable amount of time brainstorming a multimodal sensory recording that would be usable by as many people in the group as possible. Recording the ducks that you see here, for example, took over an hour and a half and comprised 37 separate recordings because I needed the ducks to be visible, make a sound, and not have the camera move too much. Finally, I'd like to reflect on our experiences and share key recommendations with you. First, we suggest holding team discussions to establish norms collectively and holistically as a community. In such a model, all of the access needs of team members can be viewed at once. This structure allows for a more holistic approach of norm creation rather than siloing accommodations for each individual and could help minimize accommodation conflicts while taking advantage of synergies or interdependencies. Second, we recommend creating a list of norms with explanations as to why to execute each norm. An explanation can help people understand how to properly implement a norm, and this list may benefit existing group members, new group members like interns, and short-term guests to the community, for example, guest speakers. And finally, we wanted to note that revisiting the list of norms is critical to continue to onboard new team members and to create new norms as needs arise either from new situations or variations in ability. Thank you for your attention. You can find our paper at the URL tinyurl.com/mixed-abilities-auto-ethno. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you.